In this episode, we look at a case of an Indian athlete whose Olympic dream ended in a Kenyan prison. We also discuss why new telecom rules could soon force WhatsApp web to log you out every 6 hours. But we begin today by talking about the declining health of parliamentary debate. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. As the winter session of Parliament begins, there are growing concerns about how the House will function and whether debates and discussions on key bills will take place in a healthy and productive way. These concerns come from a pattern seen over the past few years where disruptions in Parliament have become so frequent that they are eating into the time meant for deliberation and meaningful discussion. And so as a result, the time spent on actual debate has been steadily declining. So to understand why this is happening and what it means for legislative productivity, my colleague Niharika Nanda speaks to the Indian Express's Vikas Pathak.
Vikas, in your recent piece, you wrote about how legislative productivity has been on the decline. So in what ways would you say that is happening?
Well, there are data that one can access because, like PRS legislature puts out the data of what all is happening in Parliament across sessions, in different sessions. So if you have a look at the data, you'll clearly realize that it's a trend. It has become a kind of a long-term trend. And the question is not just this government, even in UPA 2, there was a serious problem. And if you look at it in terms of the long durée, right from the 1950s, there's clear evidence that, the length of sessions is shortening. Budget discussion is going down in terms of time, consumed by it since the 1990s. We see in recent years a trend where fewer bills are being referred to parliamentary committees. So all these things are happening in tandem. The sessions are shorter. As in the last session, we saw lots of disruptions, very little business conducted. So that is a kind of a trend that is noticeable.
And what kind of discrepancies can we see as far as debates and discussions over different bills are concerned?
So basically what is happening is that, the pattern, like we saw in the monsoon session, hopefully this session would be better. The pattern is that first of all, disruptions begin because the opposition comes up with a demand for some kind of a discussion. This time it has begun to demand a discussion on SIR. So something or the other comes. In each session, there's a demand from the opposition for a discussion on a particular issue. The government stalls it. The government says that we are ready for all discussions, but it has to be done as per the rules, as per what is decided. So what the opposition is asking for first is generally not given. It is given much later. Right. So in the meanwhile, rather than kind of, take part in what is the government's agenda for Parliament, the opposition starts stalling the House, disrupting the House, and we see repeated adjournments of the House.
अध्यक्ष जी, माननीय सदस्यगण, आज शीतकालीन सत्र का पहला दिन है। मेरी सभी माननीय सदस्यों से ये अपेक्षा है कि वह सदन में रचनात्मक और सक्रिय भागीदारी निभाएं।
And eventually, when you're coming towards closer to the end of the session, because there is pending legislative business and the House has not been functional, what the government does is that the bill is introduced and the minister speaks very briefly on it, a few minutes, and generally the bill gets passed in the din. So there isn't much discussion on most of the legislation, or at least a significant number of bills are going through without much discussion, which means that maybe the opposition MPs cannot raise their queries, fewer amendments can be moved, and the public in general also does not really know what were the strengths and the weaknesses of a bill that is passed.
Right. And Vikas, if we talk about the most recent parliamentary session, which was the monsoon session, can you share some examples of this trend?
Yeah, for instance, like in the monsoon session, 8 bills were passed overall. But the time spent on discussion was sometimes very low. I'll give you an example of the regulation of online gaming bill, which was passed in both houses of parliament on a single day. And as per the PRS legislative research, there was 6 minutes of discussion in the Lok Sabha and 23 minutes in the Rajya Sabha. That is all it took to pass the bill. Similarly, there was a long pending 2024 bill, the Merchant Shipping Bill 2024. It was also passed in the monsoon session. It took a while to get passed, but the actual discussion when it happened on it was just 20 minutes in the Lok Sabha and 10 minutes in the Rajya Sabha. So this is the kind of thing that we are sometimes seeing.
But Vikas, why are we seeing this trend? Is it mainly because of the continuous conflict between the government and the opposition, or are there other factors as well?
Yeah, gradually the relations between the government and the opposition, between the treasury benches and the opposition parties are becoming increasingly acerbic. So there was a time in parliament when, people on opposite sides could crack jokes. It was pretty well known. There was humor. You would remember, years ago or decades ago, even jokes being cracked, say, on the part of Lalu Yadav on one side and Nitish Kumar on the other, or sometimes Vajpayee on one side, Narasimha Rao on the other. So these were routine things they used to happen. I would still say, distinctly remember I was in parliament that day when Sushma Swaraj made a charge against the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who replied with an Urdu couplet. And there was laughter all around the house.
आज एक शेर पूछ करके मैं आपसे जवाब पूछना चाहती हूँ। तू इधर उधर की ना बात कर, ये बता कि काफिला क्यों लूटा। तू इधर उधर की ना बात कर, ये बता कि काफिला क्यों लूटा। हमें रेज़नों से गिरा नहीं, तेरी रहबरी का ख्याल है।
माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ मैं, माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ मैं, तू मेरा शौक तो देख, मेरा इंतजार तो।
Now, those instances are going down and the relationship is increasingly getting adversarial. So it's about one-upmanship. The opposition will try to run down the government and the government will try to run down the opposition. So yesterday when the Prime Minister in the morning addressed press persons, when the parliament session was about to begin, we saw that, of course, he expressed the hope that the House would function this time. But then he again said that, some opposition parties are losing elections. So because of losing elections, they are very bitter, very frustrated. And in some states, there's such anti-incumbency where their governments are that they can't go out to the people. Therefore, all that anger is taken out in parliament, which disturbs parliament.
दुर्भाग्य है कि एक आध दो दल तो ऐसे हैं कि वो पराजय भी नहीं पचा पाते। और मैं सोच रहा था बिहार के नतीजे इतना समय हो गया है तो अब थोड़ा संभल गए होंगे, लेकिन कल जो मैं बयानबाजी सुन रहा हूं उनकी, तो उसे लगता है कि पराजय ने उनको परेशान करके रखा है।
The Prime Minister also said, it is not a place for drama, parliament, it is a place for policy making. So while he did appeal to the opposition parties to let, the House function, it's anybody's guess whether the approach of saying that you have lost and therefore you are bitter is a very positive approach which will result in a very fruitful session, because he was referring to the Bihar election debacle of the opposition. So ideally, if the House is to function, the Prime Minister should avoid any reference to recent elections, but that did not happen. So such things are increasingly happening. Even Mr. Rahul Gandhi has time and again said after the 2024 Lok Sabha elections कि सरकार इनकी है लेकिन कैसे चलेगी ये हम decide करेंगे. So all these things which are very clearly adversarial lead to a spiral of bitterness, and the spiral of bitterness leads to continuous disruption of parliament.
And we understand that you had the opportunity to talk to some members of the parliament about this. What did they have to say about this from both the government and the opposition?
Well, from the government, we had, the Parliamentary Affairs Minister has also said something similar to what the Prime Minister said yesterday. 2 days ago, I talked to Mr. Anil Baluni, Chief Spokesperson of the BJP and also Lok Sabha MP. He also said the same thing, that, they are bitter because they are losing elections and therefore they come out with some issue just before Parliament so that they can stall Parliament. This is a line that the government is taking, and so far as the opposition is concerned, their line is somewhat different. Syed Nasir Hussain, for instance, who is a Congress Rajya Sabha MP, he said that the onus to run the House is primarily with the government. And the opposition has a right to demand discussions on issues that it thinks are pressing issues. But somehow the government chooses not to allow discussion on that particular issue to happen, which is why the opposition is forced to protest. And he reminded us that, when the BJP was in opposition, the UPA was in power. Sushma Swaraj ji and Arun Jaitley ji had clearly said when the BJP was disrupting parliament, this was UPA 2, both of them, leaders of opposition in both the houses, they said that disruption of parliament is also part of democracy. So this is what Nasir Hussain said. That apart, I also talked to Manish Tiwari, and Manish Tiwari also said that parliament cannot be converted into a rubber stamp for the legislation of the government.
And Vikas, if we zoom out a little and talk about, say, the last 5 years, what kind of a trend do we see? Was this the case then as well?
So basically, it also depends on which session we are talking about. So, for instance, the monsoon session was clearly a washout, the last one, in which, in fact, surprisingly, 50% of the time occupied that the Lok Sabha really functioned was during the Operation Sindoor debate, which means that apart from that debate, there was hardly any functioning of the Lok Sabha. So, the 17th Lok Sabha, which was 2019 to 24, in it, you see the Lok Sabha functioned for 88% of its scheduled time and the Rajya Sabha 73%. However, it had the fewest sittings among all full-term Lok Sabhas since 1952. So another thing that I'd like to say, which shows how there is a kind of a decline, the constitution has a provision for the deputy speaker. But since 2019, there has been no deputy speaker. Conventionally, this post was given to the opposition. Okay, let's go further down the road to just post-independence times and it will become very clear. So if you look at parliament since 1952, the first Lok Sabha election, the average annual sitting days have declined from 121 during the 1952 to 1970 period to just 68 since 2000, which is a big decline. It's almost half the time. Another thing I'll tell you that in parliament sometimes, since the opposition is not convinced about a bill, the government often chooses to send the bill to a parliamentary committee for further scrutiny because that is a microcosm of parliament. It is represented by both the government and the opposition. And if you see the pattern, if you see the 14th and 15th Lok Sabhas, the time of the UPA, 60% or more bills were sent to committees for scrutiny. And if you look at the 16th and 17th Lok Sabhas, the number is 20% or below. So this is also a pattern, and as per PRS legislative research, budget discussions on the union budget have also been declining in terms of the number of minutes or hours that the budget discussion was held for since the 1990s. So the trend is very clear.
Right. And over the last couple of years, which bill's discussion would you point to as an example of a good, productive parliamentary session?
Yeah, so I would say that, if you look at the last couple of years, if you remember that constitutional amendment bill to enable women's reservation at a future date, that was, a very good discussion happened. There was no disruption and it was almost unanimously passed by both houses of parliament. So in 2013, the constitutional amendment bill to enable women's reservation, which will happen, of course, it hasn't already happened. It is going to happen after census and delimitation. But that particular bill saw a very good debate and, very disciplined behavior and voting. And it showed that almost all MPs, it was almost unanimously passed. I think in one house, it was 100% people said yes to it. And in the other house, if I remember clearly, there were only 2 who went against the bill. So that was an example of very good parliamentary functioning.
But is it just the opposition which has to be blamed? What role does the government play here, since debate and discussions need to be done by both the sides?
No, the opposition alone is not to blame. As I said, it's a kind of a adversarial relation that has developed between both sides, the opposition and the government, due to which there's a competitive one-upmanship. In UPA 2 days, the BJP said that, disrupting parliament is also part of democracy. It is our right to do so. There are so many scams that are being talked about. The government is doing nothing. When the BJP comes to power, the Congress starts saying the same thing. That, disruption is a democratic right that we have. And if the government doesn't listen to us, we'll continue to disrupt. We want certain things discussed. And now the government is saying that, see, the opposition does not want the house to function. So it is not a dialogue. We are going round and round in circles. They are not seeing what the other person is saying. Both sides in that sense are very intransigent in their approach.
And Vikas, now that the winter session has begun, what are your expectations from it?
So, the SIR is now the demand of the opposition because, one, they have lost very badly in Bihar where the number of voters did go down. The government is saying that the election commission is doing the right thing in cleaning up the electoral rolls. People who may not be citizens, people who may have died, people who no longer live there should not be on the electoral rolls. And a comprehensive exercise is going on. But the opposition parties fear or claim that the idea is to disenfranchise, some people and maybe those who are more likely to vote for the opposition parties. So they want a discussion on SIR. And we also hear news of, some BLOs who are tasked with the ongoing SIR in a number of states. Some cases of, they're going on a strike or protesting or cardiac arrest here or there. Some BLOs dying. So I think the opposition would also want to flag that. As of now, the government has not accepted the demand. So once again, if the same trend continues, we might see disruptions for quite a few days.
And next, we shift our focus to a story of an Indian runner whose Olympic dream has ended with him being imprisoned. It was 2 years ago that an Indian teenager left Haryana to chase his Olympic dreams in Kenya and is now serving a 3-year prison sentence in Nairobi for his role in a doping network, an issue that has long troubled the sporting world and has highlighted the pressures young athletes face.
Doping, it's basically taking performance-enhancing drugs that help you get this short-term or medium-term boost. It helps you build muscles or recover faster from tiredness or injuries.
This is the Indian Express's Mihir Vasavda, the co-host of the Express Sports podcast.
Basically anything that assists your performance in a sporting field. There is this big list of drugs which are allowed or which are not allowed. It's prescribed by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and all athletes are expected to follow those guidelines and not take any of those banned substances. If you're caught using any of them, then you get a punishment depending on the seriousness of your offense.
Now, the teenager we mentioned earlier is the 19-year-old Aman Malik. Once an aspiring long-distance runner training in the Kenyan town of Eton, Malik pleaded guilty in September to importing and transporting banned performance-enhancing substances after investigators recovered a suitcase filled with HGH, meldonium, and other prohibited drugs from his room. And his case comes at a time when Kenya is under heightened scrutiny from global anti-doping bodies. In fact, on the very day Aman entered his guilty plea, the World Anti-Doping Agency publicly flagged Kenya as non-compliant. And so to understand how Aman got pulled in this doping scam and what options remain for him now, we speak to Mihir in this segment. Mihir, before we talk about Aman's case, could you tell our listeners a bit about the town of Eton and why it is a magnet for global athletes?
So it's this town which has been producing Olympic winners since the 1990s. There's been this school over there, St. Patrick's School, the tradition of running started from there, and it's a hub because it is almost 8,000 feet above the sea level. So it's ideal for high altitude training. Distance runners who want to improve their endurance, their speed, they often go there and train. And we've seen that Kenya has been this most dominant country in distance running at the World Championship level or in Olympic level. Most of them live and train in Eton. It's also home to this particular tribe. It's called the Kalayan tribe. And the people there are known for their long legs, for their endurance. And most of Kenyan athletes belong to this tribe. So that is another factor which comes into play. So what has happened is, since there's these two Irish patrician brothers who started the school and began the running culture over there, a lot of athletes initially just from Kenya went there to train and get better at what they do. And over the years, it then became a hub for athletes from other countries too, since everyone took notice of how successful Kenya was. So a lot of foreign athletes, they started visiting there. There are these short to medium term training camps which take place there, where you can just, join any of the running clubs. You get accommodation there for something as cheap as 7,000 rupees a month. It will be a shared accommodation, and you train there, you get better, and then compete in international events. So that's how it's become a hub over the years.
And apart from this, the region has become the epicenter of doping violations as well. You write that nearly 150 Kenyan athletes were sanctioned since 2017. So how did it turn into this hotspot for drug networks?
I mean, it's just a basic human tendency, right? So money and greed, I think, go hand in hand. I mean, this becomes a way out of poverty. for an athlete, and major international events have prize money upwards of $90,000. And even if you're going for a low or a middle level race, you get paid around $10,000-$20,000 if you win that race. So the winnings are pretty high, and with that whole enticement of earning quick buck, or not a quick buck, but a good money, earning big bucks for your effort, that in a way also pushes athletes into territories that they aren't allowed to. They try to get that extra edge over the other athlete, and in that they're lured into doping, and that's how Kenya has fallen into this trap. Like you said, there are around 150 or more athletes who have tested positive over the last few years. And right now, it has the most number of doping suspended athletes in the world right now in track and field.
Right, and at the center of one of such, what officials are calling a sophisticated network, is Aman Malik. So, can you tell us who he is and why it became central to his dream of becoming an Olympian?
So it's a very peculiar case. Not the first one from India to go and train in Eton. Aman is this young aspiring runner from Sonipat in Haryana. Haryana, as we all know, is India's biggest hub, not just for track and field, but across all sports. It is India's biggest hub. And Aman, from the time he decided that he'll make a career in running, he, like most of the runners, went to places, higher altitude places, to kind of improve his endurance, improve his speed. So in India, he went and trained in Dharamshala. He joined a training club in Haryana itself, although it wasn't high altitude, but he still trained there. And after a point, he realized that if he wants to get better, if he wants to get into this whole Olympic level times and running, he would have to move abroad. And his brother Amit Malik said that Aman probably got to know about these running camps in Kenya online. And through other Indians who have gone there, he found a way to get enrolled into a running club there and reach it in and start training there. So at least that's how we know that he found out about these running camps in Eton and then going and training there.
Right, and we know that Kenya's Directorate of Criminal Investigations raided Aman's rented room in Eton and pointed to cross-border supply chains and the involvement of intermediaries. So, talk about how serious were the substances found in Aman's possession.
So these are all performance-enhancing drugs, all different types of performance-enhancing drugs. So, for example, one is called meldonium. It's a drug that led to a 15-month ban on Maria Sharapova, the tennis star. Then there are human growth hormone injections, which were used by Lance Armstrong when he was suspended in his doping scandal. And then there are masking agents called something like a mannitol. Now, masking agents is basically a drug where if you've taken something that's illegal or prohibited in sport and you take the masking agents, it will not reflect in your samples. So these are some of the drugs that were found with him. But the Kenyan authorities also say that they accuse Aman of getting these drugs illegally into Kenya. He doesn't have the necessary permits. He's not a medicine practitioner, they say. And whatever was found in his possession was unlawfully obtained and distributed in Kenya. So those are the main allegations against him.
And Mihir, the sentencing order also names Avdish Nagar as the person who brought him the drugs. So what do we know about him? And also, how does he fit into the timeline?
So Aman directly hasn't named through the conversations we've had with him. He hasn't directly named Avdesh Nagar. He is Avdesh Nagar in the court documents where Aman is sentenced. He is named as Aman's coach. Our colleague Nihal Koshi reached out to Avdesh and Avdesh explained to him that, he's never technically been a coach in the literal sense of word, but there were videos of him with Aman on Instagram. And the Kenyan authorities, Avdesh said, saw those videos. They put two and two together and assumed that he's the coach, and he was mentioned. Now, what the court documents also say is that the bag which was found with Aman was given to him by Avdesh during one of his trips to Nairobi. Now, Avdesh doesn't deny that, but he says that he didn't know what the contents of the bag were. So there is this thing over there where there's something said in court and Avdesh denies it. And Avdesh, being in India, he is in charge. And Aman, who was in Nairobi or written there, got charged and got sentenced to 3 years in prison.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, that during your reportage, the Indian Express spoke with Aman. So what is his account of what happened?
So our colleague Nihal Koshi spoke to him multiple times. He is in a Nairobi prison right now, and every day he gets his phone for 1 hour. That's how we could manage to get in touch with him and speak with him multiple occasions. Aman says he doesn't deserve to be in prison in Kenya. He says he should be repatriated to India and he can serve out his sentence here. Or he says that, there are so many people who are caught for doping, but not in a single one of them, he says, has been jailed. At best, they're suspended from the sport or stopped from competing, and he says that's the punishment he should get. Right now, his life is very different. He says he's in this cramped cell with 30 other people. It's a 4-room cell in the Nairobi jail. Sharing it with 30 people, he is surrounded by people who speak a language he doesn't understand. They eat food which he hasn't really eaten ever. And it's a very alien condition for him, alien atmosphere for where he's living in. He speaks to his mother almost on a daily basis, and his mother has same questions almost every day. Has he eaten food? Is he well? And Aman says he doesn't really have any clue what to respond. He just keeps repeating one thing, that he wants to come back home, and the process might not be so straightforward for that.
And so, Mihir, legally speaking, can Aman return to India? Because we know that his lawyer is exploring a presidential pardon.
So there are a couple of ways, like you said, that his lawyer has been trying to figure out a mercy petition. Now, how he says that will work in Kenya is that he'll have to write an application to this Power of Mercy Committee, quote unquote, Power of Mercy Committee, which will recommend a presidential pardon for him. So that's something that they're working. Now, the hurdle here that he faces is that they are also trying to go and appeal the verdict in a local court in Nairobi. But apparently what we are made to understand is that since the sentencing is the minimum sentencing that he's got the minimum of 3 years. So it can't be reduced further. So the other options that are left with him is either to get a presidential pardon, or if the Indian High Commission in Kenya intervenes. Now, we spoke to a Ministry of External Affairs official, and they are saying that, if there is any further progress, then they'll maybe intervene. But there is no agreement between India and Kenya where imprisoned Indian nationals can be repatriated to India and they serve out the remainder of their sentence here. Since there is no such understanding between the two countries, they said that Aman will be repatriated once he serves out the sentence. The MEA said that they've spoken to the Kenyan authorities. They've requested that he should be given, whatever the facilities are as per the Kenyan laws, the best facilities should be taken care of. They checked on his health. They say he's healthy and he's doing okay. Immediate repatriation, although they said that might not be so easy.
And lastly, Mihir, Kenya in general has been under scrutiny. In fact, on the very day Aman pled guilty, a Kenyan world record holder was banned. So could you talk about Kenya's struggle with systemic doping, and also how often do we see cases like these?
So also in the last few years, the cases have increased quite a bit. And like you mentioned, even in the court hearing, the court sentencing, which the judge noticed, and they called Aman's case a serendipitous case, where they're saying that it's come at a time when there are so many cases already in Kenya. And that's what Aman and his family and his lawyers claim, that Kenya was, in the eyes of the world, not doing enough to stop the doping menace. And what Aman, his brother, and his lawyer say is that by showing the world that they have punished a foreign national, it's a message to the rest of the sporting world that, look, we are taking it seriously and we are addressing this problem. How much of it is true or not, we can't say, but that's at least what one side is saying. And at the same time, the authorities in Kenya are saying that, we are getting stricter and we are dealing with this menace in a very serious manner, and they point to the sentencing of Aman.
And in the end, we talk about how your WhatsApp web could soon log you out every 6 hours. The Department of Telecommunications issued a directive recently requiring messaging platforms such as WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and Snapchat to ensure that their services remain continuously linked to the SIM cards used during user registration. The order issued under the Telecommunications Cybersecurity Amendment Rules of 2025 mandates that these platforms implement SIM binding within 90 days and submit compliance reports within 4 months. As reported by the Indian Express's Somirendra Barik, the new rule aims to curb rising cyber fraud in India by preventing users from accessing messaging platforms without the registered SIM card inserted in their device. As a result, companion services such as WhatsApp Web will automatically log users out every 6 hours if the system does not detect the linked SIM card. Now, this could mean a major change for the current model, where once users verify their accounts through a one-time password or an OTP, they can continue using web or desktop versions without needing to keep their phone or SIM connected. Meanwhile, government officials say the directive was necessary because cybercriminals were exploiting messaging apps from outside India to commit fraud. The notice stated that some app-based communication services allow users to consume their services without availability of the underlying SIM within the device, which poses risks to telecom cybersecurity. Barik notes that telecom companies represented by the Cellular Operators Association of India, or COAI, have supported the measure. COAI said that continuous SIM binding would help identify fraudsters more effectively, since under the current system, an app remains active even after the registered SIM card is removed or deactivated. However, digital industry executives and privacy advocates have expressed concerns about the rule's practical implications. They argue that it could create friction for users who rely on multi-device functionality or travel internationally. A senior industry executive told the Indian Express that the directive would prevent users from using WhatsApp with foreign SIM cards while abroad. Another said that 6-hour logout window would disrupt professional workflows, as many employees use messaging services on desktop devices during work hours. Experts have also questioned whether the rule will effectively deter cyber fraud, noting that many fraudsters use SIM cards acquired through forged or mule identity documents. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargav, Niharika Nanda, and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.